Hi, it's Penny here, and as usual, I'm here to talk about some bookish things. Specifically today, I wanted to talk about all the books I read in May. So I read 20 books in May, which I am quite impressed with. Part of that was definitely because I participated in 3 readathons in May, and to be honest, I've banned myself from readathons in June because that was somewhat crazy and a little bit stressful. So we're gonna focus more on my physical shelves, just reading my own books for June. And following on from that, I don't actually have a lot of the books that I read in May because a lot of them were library books or audio books or books I borrowed from my brothers and sisters. So we've only got a little pile here, but I will talk about all 20. I have been talking way too long already. So I'm going to go through all the fiction books from worst to best, and then I'll do the non-fiction ones, and then maybe I'll give you a little bit of wrap up on the different readathons. Anyway, I need to hurry up and talk about the books. I'm going to try and be really brief as I talk about each of these books because there are so many, but there are some I've done more detailed reviews about, so I will put those links down below, or otherwise I will do more detailed reviews in the future, so subscribe and all that jazz if you want to hear more detailed thoughts about some of these books. So unfortunately, the worst book I read in the month of May was The Witch Doesn't Burn in This One by Amanda Lovelace. I actually realized that this is the second book. It follows on from The Princess Saves Herself in this one, and I probably should have read that one first. And I'm not sure if reading it in ebook form helped my enjoyment either, but I just don't think it was the right kind of poetry or the right kind of feminism for me. So sadly, I had to give it 2 stars. But I did manage to tick off the prose badge for Bookemon Badgeathon, so it's not all bad. Then the next worst book I read was One Punch Man, which is a Japanese manga, and I think just not really my style because it's a lot of fighting and action. But again, it counted for the pictorial badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. It also counts for the Asian Readathon, and I read it during Borrowathon, so it counted for that. So it counted for all 3 readathons. Next, I read The Girl Who Played with Fire by Stieg Larsson. I actually listened to this on audiobook, but it does come off my physical TBR now that I have read it. And I counted this for the Chiller badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. There were parts of this that I enjoyed, but I think just overall it was a bit all over the place. So I think I give it 3 stars, but it's probably more like a 2.5 stars kind of deal. Or even the more I think about it, maybe it's only 2 stars. Anyway, not my favorite. Oh, look, all the ones I actually have are all in a row. So the next one I read is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. So this is about the last humans that escape from Earth when it gets destroyed to build an intergalactic highway. It is quite funny, but it's that very British humor. So I think not everyone will get the humor, and for me, I really only enjoyed some of it because I watched the TV series when I was a lot younger, and so I had that nostalgic feeling. But I did count this for the scientific badge for Bookemon Badgeathon, and I did give this 3 stars. It's not that I hated it, it's just that it wasn't quite as good as I was hoping it would be. I haven't decided yet whether I will continue with the series, but I would like to go back and watch the TV show. Then next I read Soundless by Richelle Mead, which I counted for the Asian Readathon, even though it's a bit of a stretch, but it is an Asian inspired fantasy and it does have these Asian characters, even though it's set in a fantasy world, and it's also written by a white author. So I counted this for the diversity badge for Bookemon Badgeathon, but I kind of think that's like just scraping through. Still, I read this. I needed to count it somewhere. So for most of this book, I was actually thinking I would give this 3 stars, which I was surprised about because when it first came out, there was a lot of hype for it on BookTube, but that quickly changed to a lot of negative reviews, and then no one ever talked about it again. I picked it up when I saw it in my work library, swapped it out for another book because I was curious as to why everyone disliked it so much. Sometimes I do that. And then for most of the book I was thinking, oh yeah, this is okay. I mean, it's nothing amazing, but it probably is a 3-star book. It's okay. And then the ending introduced this fantastical element with no warning, and the whole thing seemed very unrealistic. And on top of all the other kind of niggly things that I was willing to overlook until that point, it had to be a 2-star. This book is about a village at the top of a mountain. They can't get off the top of the mountain, but they mine for metals, send them down, and get food sent up to them in return. Nobody in this village can hear anything, and now some of them have started to lose their sight. But our main character is an artist, and she has started to hear things. As I said, I really enjoyed parts of it, but overall it just doesn't quite hold up. Then next I read 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, which was an anthology put together by Ellen O and Elise Chapman, and each story is basically a retelling of a different Asian myth or legend. Now, like most anthologies, there were some stories that I really loved, others that I wasn't a fan of, so overall it got a 3, kind of average in the middle. And this was the group book for the Asian Readathon, as well as I counted it for the Rainbow Badge in Bookemon Badgeathon because there were quite a few LGBT characters in the different short stories. I also read about half of that book during Borrowathon, so it counts for that as well. Then I also read The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden. So this is the second book in the Bear and the Nightingale series. I'm not sure, is that what the series is actually called? Probably not. But in the first book, we follow a girl named Vasya and the rest of her family. Now, Vasya can see different Russian folklore creatures at a time when the Catholic Church is becoming much more prevalent throughout Russia. And so there's this conflict with her and the church. And then in the second book, Vasya is continuing her adventure. She ends up dressing up and pretending to be a boy for a lot of the story. And I really want to love this story, but it took quite a long time to get going, and there's just too much time spent on the rest of the family when I just really want to know about the Russian folklore creatures. But since the end did get exciting, I ended up still giving it 3 stars, even though for a lot of the book I was expecting to give it 2 stars. And I counted that for the archival badge for Bookemon Badgeathon, since it is a historical fiction, even though the historical fiction bit is the bit that I like the least about it. Then I read My Love Story by Kazune Kawahara. I don't normally like romance, but I thought this was so lovely and pure. It's a story about this big lovable guy who often has crushes on girls, but they always seem to fall for his very handsome friend. The story tells the story of them meeting a girl where things go very differently, and it was just beautiful. And also I was able to count this towards the Amour badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. And since I borrowed this manga from my brother, it counted for the Borrowathon as well. So I gave My Love Story 3 stars, but I think it's more of a 3.5 3-star. Then I also read The Devouring Grey by Christine Lynn Herman. This book is very popular on BookTube at the moment, and I do think it is deserved. It is YA, so it is still quite simple, but I really enjoyed the magic system and the characters. Basically, we follow this girl, Violet, whose sister has just died, so she's moved back with her mother to her mother's hometown, where there is this horrible creature called the Grey, which lives inside this horrible fog that comes out and kills people. And the town is protected by the founding families, of which Violet's family is one of them, and people from the founding families have different magical abilities depending on which family they're from. So The Devouring Grey was the battle book for Team Mystic in the Bookemon Badgeathon. Team Mystic! So I gave it 4 stars, and I will definitely be continuing with the series. There's actually a lot of 4-star books on my list here. No 5 stars, but maybe some 4.5s. So then I also read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and I do recommend this on audiobook, which is what I listen to. I think for classics, I personally really struggle with reading the older style writing of classics, but audiobooks can really help, and I think the Rebecca audiobook is really well narrated, and the atmosphere is just so spooky because it is a mystery story about this girl who's training to be a companion to different older women or men, I guess, and she meets this man and ends up going to live in this very fancy house, but she's very intimidated by the ex-wife of this man, who is now dead, but her reputation is everywhere, and throughout the story you slowly learn more and more about her. So I counted this towards the exemplary badge in Bookemon Badgeathon, and I also read it during Borrowathon, since all the audiobooks I listen to do come from the library. Then another audiobook that I listened to was The Scopio Races by Maggie Stiefvater, and I really loved this book. And this is another audiobook that I really recommend. I think Maggie Stiefvater puts a lot of effort into her audiobooks. And this story is a story set on like an Irish island where there are these horses that come out of the ocean, and then once a year there is a race of these horses that are very wild and dangerous. And we follow a couple of characters, Puck and Sean, who both need to win the race. So the narrators in the audiobook had Irish accents. Maggie Stiefvater always writes some beautiful music to go on the audiobook, so definitely recommend the audiobook, because I also think I have heard some people complain that it is a bit slow, which it might be, but I find that listening to an audiobook often helps kind of get through those slower books without being so annoyed about the fact that they're slower. And I think this is one of the few books that I read for May that wasn't for any readathons. Weird. So then also during Borrowathon, I really quickly read Everyone's an Alien When You're an Alien Too by Jomny Sin. This is just a really quick read. It's all pictures, like each page is a big picture just with like a quick little couple of sentences of dialogue. We're following this cute little alien who's come down to Earth to learn about humans. None of the other aliens really seem to like him. Really knows nothing about Earth. But the story is just so lovable and really gets to the truth of things in a way that, even though it's the silly story about this alien talking to all these different animals, it's just beautiful and really touches your heart. And since it's such a quick read, I really think nobody has an excuse not to have read it. Like, you should read it. Even if you can't afford to buy it, like, get it from the library like I did. So as I said, I read this for Borrowathon, and it also counted for the Jester badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. And also Jomny Sin is, I couldn't find out his exact heritage, but he does describe himself as Asian Canadian, so it counts for the Asian Readathon as well. Honestly, I was just so happy to have read that book. Definitely one of my favorites of the month, along with the next two fiction books that I'm going to talk about. So the first one is Death Note by Tsugumi Ohba, I believe. So Death Note is really well known. It's this guy called Light who ends up finding this notebook which belongs to this a death god, and when he writes someone's name in the notebook, then they die. And Light is trying to use this notebook to save the world. I really just loved how the story unfolds through this first volume, and I thought the Death Demon guy was so cute. I have borrowed the next 3 volumes from my brother, so I'm going to be getting to those in the next month, and I'm really excited about it. And I did count this for the Panic badge for Bookemon Badgeathon, as well as reading it during the Borrowathon. Oh, and it also counts for the Asian Readathon since it's Japanese manga. Then the last fiction book that I read in May was The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I will say this was a 1,000-page book, and I don't think it needed to be that long, and there are some things that I think were flawed about it. Otherwise it would have been a 5-star, but I think it's more like a 4 point something for me. There were some aspects I absolutely loved, and I really liked a lot of the ideas in it about leadership, but I didn't think that the women in the story got enough page time, especially since what they're doing is the most interesting. I don't really like war stuff, and there was a lot of war stuff in this book. But of course it's Brandon Sanderson, so it was great. The magic system is really complicated. There's a lot going on. And even though I've read 1,000 pages and so much has happened, I feel like there's still so much more to happen, which no doubt, since it's going to be a 10-book series and probably each one is going to be 1,000 pages. So it's going to be a big effort, but I'm there for it. And I counted this towards the Fantastical badge and Bookemon Badgeathon. So very quickly, I do want to talk about the non-fiction books that I read this month. I did try to line them up best to worst alongside fiction, but how do you compare fiction and non-fiction? It didn't work. So instead, I'm going to talk about them separately, but again, worst to best. So the worst non-fiction that I read in May was When Women Ruled the World by Kawahara. Yes, Kawahara. I only gave this 2 stars. This is meant to be a book about 6 different Egyptian queens and how they got to power, but honestly, there were so many reasons why I didn't like it that I can't even begin to express it in a very short amount of time. But I just didn't really learn that much about the different Egyptian queens. I was very confused through a lot of it. I thought it jumped around too much. And so overall, it was very disappointing. Moving on, then I also listened to The Brain Fog Fix by Dr. Mike Dow. So this is a book about how to reclaim your focus, memory, and joy in just 3 weeks. I do think this is kind of weird to listen to as an audiobook because the second half of the book is designed for you to kind of work through a 3-week challenge, and I didn't do that. Also, I was somewhat disappointed because most of it is about diet, and it is stuff that I know that I should do, but am I likely to do it? Probably not, to be honest. So I think a lot of what it had to say was really good. It was a really short audiobook. I think people could get some value from it, but unfortunately most of the advice that it had that was relevant to me are things that I already know, but I just don't do. Maybe it was kind of good to, I think at the time that I listened to it, I was like, yeah, I should do some of these things. But now that it's been a little while, I haven't done any of those things. But I think if you do have a real problem, like I don't have much of a problem with focusing. I think if you have a really big problem with focusing, then probably you would get a lot from this book. Then on the last day of May, I picked up Pop Surrealism, The Rise of Underground Art by Kirsten Anderson. So this is an art book my sister had. I borrowed it really quickly. In fact, I didn't even take it away from her house, just so that I could tick off the creative badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. There's actually very little reading involved in reading this book. There was a little bit of stuff in the beginning about what was a good name for this different kind of art, which mostly I thought was very pretentious and unnecessary, but there was, some of the art was really amazing, and some of the artists are some of my favorites. So it was a fun little read. Then I also borrowed from the library Story World First by Jill Williamson. This is a nonfiction book about building a story world if you are writing fiction. One thing I do want to try and do this year, although it's already June, what the hell, but I want to write a novel. I have wanted to do this for a long time. I have the time, theoretically, I have the time at the moment. So I've been trying to read a few books to get some inspiration and try to figure out how to write better. This is one, I thought some of the stuff at the beginning was really great, but as it went on, I felt like maybe she had a deadline and she didn't really have enough content, and she just like blasted some stuff out, and it wasn't quite as good as the first couple of chapters. Also, since I read a lot of fantasy, a lot of the ideas weren't new to me, but it was good to have a structure to think through. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend this for potential writers, but it was somewhat useful, so I gave it 3 stars. I also gave 3 stars to Down the Rabbit Hole by Holly Madison. So Holly Madison was Hugh Hefner's main girlfriend when they filmed the reality TV show all about the Playboy Mansion and his girlfriends living with him in that mansion. And Holly Madison's telling her story about how she ended up living in the mansion and what it was like living there. She is trying to dispel the myth that it was glamorous, which I found a bit strange because I never would have assumed it was glamorous. I would have thought creepy and yuck. Living with a like 70-year-old man, war, when you're like a 20-something-year-old woman. But that said, I did think it was quite well written, and it's narrated by her herself. So I think it was good hearing it in her own voice. And even though I didn't always agree with her perspective, it's her story, and I think she told it well. And I counted this towards the memory badge for Bookemon Badgeathon. Then the best nonfiction audiobook that I listened to in May was 13 Things That Mentally Strong People Don't Do by Amy Morin. I think this is actually quite a well-known self-help book. Basically, there's 13 things it's kind of recommending you don't do. Now, I don't think that this will be for everyone, but I do think that it did quite a good job of explaining why people might naturally do some of these things and giving you concrete steps about how to avoid doing those things. I also found a lot of those things were relevant to me, and even when it was things that I don't do, it was quite nice to reinforce that behavior in myself. So I found it very inspiring, although again, I will say probably not for everyone. I read some of the reviews and some people thought it was quite judgmental, so I'm not sure it would be the best book for people who have mental health issues or are struggling in some way, but I think if you're in a fairly good place and you just want to be in a better place, that this could be quite beneficial. Whew, I feel like I've been talking forever, but that is all 20 books that I read in the month of May. So to quickly summarize all the readathons, because I know I mentioned readathons a lot in there and it got mega confusing. But so for Bookemon Badgeathon, there were 15 badges and I completed all of the badges. I also read the Team Mystic group book or battle book, which was the Devouring Grey. And I also completed the secret challenge. So if you check out my TBR machine chooses my TBR video, you will see what that secret challenge was all about, but I did have a really good time participating in the Bookemon Badgeathon. I think it really encouraged me to read more broadly. Last time I checked, Team Mystic is winning, so there's still more time for people to record their scores, but hopefully we will become the very best. Then Borrowathon, I did already post a blog for the week of Borrowathon, so if you want to know any more about any of the books I read for that readathon, you can go there. Overall, I did complete 5 of the 6 challenges. Even though I did read 8.5 books during Borrowathon, I couldn't quite shuffle them into the challenges. Then lastly, for the Asian Readathon, I did post a very ambitious, aspirational TBR for Asian Readathon, and I didn't read most of those books as I expected, but I will try to prioritize reading some of those books in the following months. I did manage to read 6 books for the Asian Readathon, and I think I've covered all the challenges. So the first one was to read any book by an Asian author, which I did do. Second challenge was to read a graphic novel featuring an Asian character or written, drawn by an Asian author. So I read 3 Japanese manga, so they all count for that. Then it was to read a book featuring an intersectional Asian character or written by an intersectional Asian identity, so someone who is both Asian as well as queer, disabled, neurodiverse, all those kind of things. And sadly for that, the best I can do is the group book, 1,000 Beginnings and Endings. Number 4 is to read a book by an Asian author that was originally written in their native language. I'm pretty sure some of the manga counts for that, so I will count that. And then read the group book, 1,000 Beginnings and Endings. I read that. So I think I did complete all the challenges. As well, the idea was that if you completed different challenges by reading different books, then they should be from different Asian nationalities. So I think I did pretty good because obviously the manga is Japanese. Soundless was fantasy Asian inspired. The worst one. Jomni-san is Asian Canadian, whatever that means. And 1,000 Beginnings and Endings had all sorts of different Asian cultures represented. So I think I succeeded in terms of reading from a range of different Asian ethnicities. I do think this month I only ended up reading 2 books off my physical TBR, so that isn't the best progress ever, but at least it is getting slightly smaller. Anyway, that is all the books that I have to talk about. If you have read any of the books that I talked about today, I would love to talk to you about them more down in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Otherwise, I hope you are having a wonderful day. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.